It's strange, the things you remember at the end of a world. The taste of iron in recycled air. The way light shivers across a fractured visor. The sound of her boots, steel against steel, echoing down the corridor of a ship that smelled like rust and fear. Her name was Ira Vale, and though history would argue otherwise, she wasn't born a hero. She was forged slowly, brutally, like glass pressed into a diamond under the weight of impossible decisions. She was once the pride of the unified human fleet, a commander so precise her tactics were studied by both humans and enemies alike. They called her the Iron Halo, not for the gleam of her armor, but for the way she circled her people in war. Protective, relentless, divine. Her face, always calm, belonged to someone who had seen too much and broken too little. Not because she couldn't, because she wouldn't. And maybe that was the problem. By the time the Vrain War entered its third cycle, Ira had already logged more flight hours than any officer in her class. She'd brokered ceasefires between blood factions, rerouted crippled carriers through asteroid debris fields, and led ghost crews back from forgotten moons. But command is a lonely throne, and hers was built on silence. Her subordinates respected her. Superiors feared her. No one truly knew her, until she said no. The order was simple: destroy the convoy passing through the Juno expanse. Intelligence claimed it was carrying Vrain tech, possibly bioagents. Standard protocol: zero tolerance. But she'd scan the convoy herself, read the heat signatures, trace the biometric scans. Civilians. Injured. Unarmed. So not even Vrain. The war didn't care. Politics didn't pause for ethics. She did. When they asked for confirmation, her voice was even, almost bored. Negative, Admiral. No fire. That one sentence stripped her of everything. They didn't arrest her in public. No, the shame had to be clinical, controlled. They reassigned her under Code Black Protocol. No trial, no appeal. Discharge disavowed, erased. Just a silent transfer to Echo 9, a penal world orbiting a dying red star. She didn't fight it. Not out loud. The transport was quiet, clinical. 30 prisoners, 6 guards, 2 pilots, and 1 Ira Vale, sitting upright in her restraints like royalty in exile. Her armor was damaged, dulled at the edges, the breastplate fractured from a recent engagement she wasn't credited for. A single bloodstain bloomed below her collar, like a forgotten medal. No one looked her in the eye. Most recognized her, even if they pretended not to. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence did more than words ever could. The ship itself was old, groaning through jump space like a wounded animal. There was no glory here, no ceremony. Just the hum of containment fields and the occasional static burst from the failing long-range comms. The guards sat in 2 rows along the corridor, rifles across their laps, hands twitching with discipline they barely held. They weren't trained for someone like her. And then came the rupture. Not a warning, not a scan, just a flicker, a heartbeat of distortion, and then the deck split sideways. Gravity warped. Lights shattered. The shriek of metal losing its integrity tore through the hull like thunder underwater. The ship jolted, bodies slammed against bulkheads, and fire bloomed in zero gravity like petals of plasma. Vrain strike craft, sleek and silent, tore through their defenses in seconds. Precision attacks. No hails. No demands. Just annihilation. They weren't here for conquest. They were here to erase. And in that frozen moment of chaos, when everyone else ducked or panicked or hesitated, she stood. The footage, grainy, filtered through fractured surveillance lenses, shows her rising like a blade, unsheathed. She moved without orders, without a weapon, and with purpose only she understood. A section of the ship was venting atmosphere. The breach would take the guards first, then the prisoners, then the core. She moved toward the rupture. Not away. One of the guards shouted for her to stop. Another raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking and she didn't flinch. She reached the manual override panel and, with a roar of metal and blood, slammed it shut just as the corridor behind her vanished into space. The pressure door sealed. Lives were spared. No thanks were given. She collapsed after that, coughing blood, half-conscious, the edges of her vision trembling with sparks. But her body didn't fall. Not entirely. She braced against the bulkhead, smeared with carbon and sweat, eyes still alert. One of the guards approached her then. Young, pale, name patch red, Solon. Hey! He didn't salute. He didn't speak, just crouched beside her and offered water. She waved it off. He didn't leave. You knew it would cost you, he said after a moment, disobeying the fire order. Her breath was shallow. It always costs. But why? She turned her head, just enough to look at him. Not through him. At him. Her voice, low and hoarse, still managed to cut clean. Because if we can't see them as people, what's left of us? The ship moaned under stress, but the worst had passed. Emergency systems re-engaged. The few still alive began to move, check injuries, repair bulkheads. No one spoke to her, but no one restrained her either. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. Not truly. The breach was sealed. The lives were saved. The Vrain ship, perhaps confused by the resistance, had fled. Later, records would report it as a minor skirmish, insignificant. But for those on board, history had shifted. She didn't ask for gratitude, didn't seek redemption. She stood alone in the corridor once more, her shadow flickering under emergency lights. The guards returned to their seats. The prisoners murmured to each other in new tones, confused, awed, cautious. Solon sat nearest to her now, back straight, hands still. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to, because in that moment, amidst smoke and silence, the myth began to breathe again. And somewhere deep within the failing systems of a dying ship, history exhaled. Ira Vale was not gone. She was just getting started. She arrived on Echo, 9 under a blood-orange sky that pulsed like a wound refusing to heal. The penal colony was barely more than scattered shelters and a central core, housing atmospheric regulators and dwindling supplies. The sun, if it could be called that, cast everything in a sickly amber, and the wind whispered across the ashen plains with the voice of forgotten prayers. Ira Vale stepped off the transport with the steady gait of someone who had marched into death and come back not unscathed, but unbroken. The guards didn't escort her. They didn't dare. They simply watched her walk down the ramp, the dust curling around her boots, as if even the planet recognized something ancient in her presence. Her arrival was met with silence, not awe. The workers paused their labor for a moment, a few lowering their heads, others turning away entirely. Whispers traveled faster than wind in places like Echo 9, and her name had already arrived before she had. Not the name from battle reports or hollowed-out documentaries, but the name branded with shame, stripped of its medals. Traitor. Coward. The one who chose aliens over her own. Her assigned quarters were little more than a rusted shipping container converted into living space, walls stained with condensation and age. She didn't complain. She didn't unpack. She sat on the cot, elbows on knees, fingers steepled under her chin, eyes closed. Her body stilled, but her mind began again. Measuring, counting, studying sounds outside. Footsteps, metallic clanks, the hum of the failing power grid. She wasn't planning escape. She was searching for signs of life worth saving. Work began the next morning. Manual labor, heavy equipment, radiation exposure, minimum rations. The other workers avoided her, and those who didn't spat near her feet. One, a broad-shouldered mechanic with oil-streaked hands, brushed past her hard enough to knock her shoulder. "Don't need murderers fixing air vents," he said without looking. She said nothing, but her hand grazed the side of the vent he'd just sealed. A single crack, barely visible. She resealed it. Walked on. Days turned to weeks. Her muscles adapted to the physical strain, but the silence never did. The isolation wasn't punishment. It was exile within exile. Even the AI voice that regulated shift changes spoke to her with a delay, as if processing whether she deserved communication at all. Still, she showed up. Every day. On time. With precision. Fixing things no one asked her to fix. Calibrating systems the engineers had given up on. No one acknowledged her. Until someone did. He came to her near sundown, the shadows long and the sky rippling with ion storms. Ari Solon, the young guard from the transport, now stripped of uniform and working the mines like the rest. His face was weathered differently here, not by battle, but by slow, constant disappointment. "You're the reason we're breathing," he said without introduction. "The override on the reactor back on the ship, it was you." She didn't look at him. "You shouldn't be seen speaking to me." He sat on the edge of the tool crate beside her. "Then let them see." They spoke little after that. Their connection was never built on words. Instead, he left tools at her workstation. She returned them cleaner than she found them. He rerouted a power node to her quarters when hers failed. She repaired his oxygen compressor without asking. They moved in each other's orbits like two moons caught in gravity neither could name. No declarations. No apologies. Just motion, honest and deliberate. The colony began to change quietly. Systems worked longer. Accidents decreased. An old desalination pump came back online. No one gave credit. No one needed to. But resentment twisted in those who preferred her broken. The mechanic, Garrow, the one who first shoved her, watched her more closely now. His pride hadn't healed from being proven wrong by silence. Tensions boiled over during storm. Power outages disabled the comms, and a containment leak in the hydrogen silos threatened ignition. Standard protocols required 3 personnel to manually seal the feed lines. But the third, a technician barely past 20, panicked and fled. With time bleeding away, Ira and Solon descended into the storm tunnels, oxygen mass locked in place, light flickering red. The valves were fused. Manual override required 1 person to climb into the pressure chamber, risking direct exposure. Solon reached for the hatch. She stopped him. Her voice, through the mask, was calm. "You have someone who'll miss you." His hands clenched. "So do you," he said. She shook her head. "Not anymore." She entered the chamber. The heat hit first, then the pressure. Her body screamed, but she moved with the precision of an old rhythm. Every turn of the valve echoed like thunder in her bones. The last seal resisted. Alarm spiked. Solon's voice crackled through the comms, shouting her name. She didn't answer. She used both hands. Turned. The system stabilized. The hatch opened seconds later. She collapsed into his arms, breathing ragged, suit scorched, skin blistered. He held her like she was something fragile, not forged, not indestructible. They carried her to medical, the others too stunned to interfere. No one spoke. Not Garrow, not the foreman. Just quiet, reverent stillness. The next day, someone left clean water at her door. The day after, a child waved to her on the way to school. And on the third day, Garrow approached her, eyes hard. He didn't apologize. He handed her a damaged pressure gauge. "Still leaks," he said. "You're good with cracks." She nodded once, took the tool, repaired it in silence. Word came through the colony net 2 weeks later, garbled transmissions, emergency reports. A new wave of range ships had entered the system. Their pattern wasn't exploratory. It was tactical. The war wasn't over. It was coming to Echo 9. The first ship appeared above Echo 9's eastern horizon like a shadow cast by a dying god. No lights, no message, just a curve of obsidian slicing through the haze, silent and unrelenting. A scout-class Vrain warcraft, designed for fast atmosphere breach and surgical ground strikes. 3 more followed, then 12. By the third day, the skies wept ash, and the wind stank of engine fuel and charred metal. The unified fleet wasn't coming. Echo 9 wasn't a priority. It was a sentence. And now it was a target. Panic rippled through the colony like a fever. People fled their stations. Fights broke out over water, tools, bunkers. The automated comms looped the same message. Shelter in place. Await contact from Central Command. But there was no command. No reinforcements. No plan. Just 2,000 forgotten lives under a sky that now wanted them gone. Ira Vale stood in the heart of the courtyard, surrounded by machines too old to run and people too scared to lead. The air tasted of static and dust. She listened to the murmurs, accusations, desperation, prayers, and waited for someone to rise. No one did, not even the foreman. He'd barricaded himself inside the comms tower the moment the threat became visible. Ari Solon found her beside the old water pump, recalibrating the pressure lines with practiced grace. His voice was tight. They'll be here within 2 rotations. The shielding's 10 years out of date. We won't hold. She didn't stop working. We're not supposed to. He crouched beside her. And you're still going to fight? She looked at him then, eyes lit not by rage, but something colder. I'm going to prepare. They'll fight. I'll lead. He didn't ask what that meant. He simply nodded and stood with her. Later that night, they gathered in the mess hall, half-lit, ceiling flickering, and those willing to listen came. Not many, just enough. Garrow was among them, arms crossed, jaw locked in skepticism. Ira stood before them without elevation or uniform. Only the presence of someone carved by choice and consequence. They're coming, she said. We can't outrun them, and hiding will make us easier to cull. So we don't run. We don't hide. We become the cost of conquest. Someone scoffed. Another muttered, We're not soldiers. She didn't argue. She nodded. You're not. You're survivors. Survivors make harder targets. They fortified what they could, reactivated old drones, reinforced entry tunnels with collapsed machinery, rewired mining lasers into static cannon arrays. The children were sent into the deep caverns with medical supplies and rations. Ira mapped every line of approach, every shadow, every blind spot. She worked without sleep, stripping her own armor down to its base alloys to forge kinetic plating for the drones. Solon stayed by her side, hands blistered, voice hoarse. Garrow taught others how to melt debris into shrapnel. Fear shaped into duty. When the first Vrain dropship breached the atmosphere, it didn't come with sirens or ceremony. It landed in silence, kicking up waves of orange sand as it unfolded into a grotesque blossom of limbs and light. 6 Vrain soldiers spilled out, each one towering, armor slick with black resin. The colony was dark, motionless, a calculated illusion. They stepped forward. Ira's voice crackled through the short-range comm line. Now, the trap snapped. A wave of reprogrammed repair bots, rigged with scrap explosives, erupted from the tunnels. The blast wasn't fatal, but it was disorienting. Enough for the static turrets to lock on. Lasers screamed through the dark, cutting through 2 invaders before the others adapted. One fell toward the infirmary. Another vanished behind the generator bay. Then came the counterattack. The Vrain regrouped, faster than expected. Their suits adjusted. Their movements became erratic. One by one, turrets failed. The drones were crushed. The first line of defense buckled. Ira moved through it all like lightning in a storm, precise, silent, necessary. She didn't waste breath on commands. Her hand spoke for her. Her actions shaped the tempo. She dragged a wounded miner out of the blast zone, fired a jury-rigged pulse cannon through a fractured doorway, sealed a breach in the tunnel gate with nothing but melted orange grit. Solon followed, a step behind, shielding her flank, absorbing every ricochet she couldn't dodge. Blood streamed from his cheek, his shoulder, his side, but he didn't stop. They reached the control chamber, the last fallback point. The colony's power core, if detonated, could take out half the landing zone. It was their last option, a choice of extinction or erasure. She keyed in the ignition protocol. 10 minutes to overload. We still have people out there, Solon said, voice cracking. She looked at the screen. 1 Vrain remained, larger, faster, smarter than the rest. It moved like a predator behind fire. And it was hunting. I'll go, she said. You guard the core. He grabbed her wrist. You go out there, you won't come back. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak. Instead, she leaned in, just enough to press her forehead to his. A gesture, small and infinite. Then she turned and ran into the fire. She found the last civilians in the storage wing, 2 engineers and a medic, bleeding and cornered. The Vrain stood between them and escape, armored fingers curled around a plasma scythe. Ira didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward, drawing the creature's focus, slamming into it with enough force to crack her shoulder. They fought in silence, all breath and motion. She dodged 2 strikes, landed 1, ducked low. The blade grazed her thigh. She pivoted, grabbed the hilt, twisted. Steel screamed. Flesh tore. She pressed the charge detonator against its chest and activated it. The explosion ruptured the corridor, scattering metal and flesh. She hit the floor hard, breath gone, ribs fractured. But she crawled to her feet, pulled the civilians with her, staggered back through the fire. By the time they reached the core chamber, Solon had overridden the countdown. Not canceled it, recalibrated it, targeted only the landing site. Collateral, minimal. Damage, final. They launched the charge. The skies over Echo, 9 lit up in unnatural auroras. The Vrain ship fractured mid-flight, collapsing like a folding star. Screams rose, then silence. And in that silence, Ira Vale stood, broken, bloodied, alive. She looked to the horizon and whispered, "Not again."